Hey, everybody. This is going to be some tips for the Scan and Cut CM350. And that is the machine that I actually have. Now, I will say that I was inspired to do this because I had a few sheets of ephemera that comes from my digital kits over at pleasantcreations.com that needed to be cut, and they've just been sitting around, and I decided to do some cutting today. So I thought that I would share this with you and at the same time share with you some things that I've learned while using the Scan and Cut. Now, the Scan and Cut is an amazing machine, and it saves you a ton of time, and I love it so much. So I definitely would recommend buying this machine, and the link will be below to the one that I have, so you can check it out and see for yourself. But if you are a crafter and you love paper like I do, you'll want one of these machines. So what I'm going to do as I go through my cutting process here is I'm going to, again, just give you some tips. So this particular sheet that I have on here is actually available to my Patreon members. I gifted this to them, and these were some ticket stamps that I stamped and I die cut with my Vagabond. And so you'll be able to pick those up again if you are a Patreon Superfan Plus member. This is one of the rewards that is out there. So the first thing that I always do before I cut anything is I turn the machine off just so it clears out everything, and then I will turn the machine back on and then continue the process. So I was able to cut over 112 sheets, well, not sheets, I'm sorry, over 112 pieces of ephemera within about a half an hour. And it took me a little bit longer because I had to keep moving the camera around here. But normally it would probably take about maybe about 30 minutes, so about 5 minutes a sheet, because there's some things that you have to do to get this going. So one of my tips is to just be patient when you're doing this. That's the first tip, is you need a little bit of patience, but if you have the patience, you can make things look fantastic. So now my mat is a not so sticky, and I'm going to talk about the mats in just a bit. And so what I usually do is when I put my sheets down, I use some tape. So you can buy some cheap tape at the dollar store or wherever and just have some tape handy. And well, let me talk about the mat first. So assuredly, your mat will be unsticky after about 3 or 4 times using it. It'll have just a little bit of tack to it, and you can see my mat is pretty grungy. And also, you will assuredly cut through your mat at some point. Don't throw your mat away. As you can see, I have some duct tape that is going across my mat where I actually cut it. But just know that you're not going to get good cuts if you use duct tape. And I'm using the part of the mat where the duct tape is not at, because I learned the hard way that it really doesn't work out well when you have the duct tape on the back, but you can rescue your sheet that way and still be able to use it. So my plan is to use it until the wheels fall off. So again, I always check the depth of my blade before I start cutting anything, because I have some different types of sheets that I'm going to be using. So a tip is always to check your blade depth. And the reason why I cut through my mat is because I did not go through this step. So you definitely want to check your blade depth when it comes to putting different types of sheets in. Now you'll have to check for yourself and kind of experiment what depth to use for what types of paper you have. For me, if I just have plain copier paper, I can get away with 1.5 to 2. And if I'm doing cardstock, I usually use around 4. If I'm cutting washi, I usually use around 2.5. So I'll have all of these in the post over on Patreon. So if you're not a Patreon member, you can head over there to patreon.com/Liz for a day, and the link will be in the description below as well. So now these are some vintage vocabulary letters that I'm cutting here. And again, you have to be a little bit patient, but patience really pays off when you're doing this, because let's face it, do I want to sit down and cut all of these pieces out, even with a cutter? No, I do not. And you can see everything comes up quite nicely. So my next tip is, when you have all these pieces on your mat, because it does have a little bit of stick still left on this mat, use your spatula. Now this little spatula actually comes with the scan and cut. So as long as you keep everything together, then you'll be able to use your little spatula, and it picks up things quite nicely and very quickly. So now these are some letters from my digital vintage Scrabble letter kit. And again, that's over at pleasantcreations.com. And I actually printed this out in black and white because I wanted to use these with some of my black and white journals. So again, I turned the machine off. I checked my blade depth, and then I went ahead and I put this in. But if you noticed, my paper wasn't flat. So another tip is to make sure that your paper that you're going to be cutting is laying flat on the mat. That's very important. And once I did that adjustment, I had to re-scan that sheet again, because if you try to use the initial scan, then the cuts are not going to be straight. They're going to definitely be cut off. So now that I have that all straight, I should be able to cut all these little teeny tiny pieces out with no problem at all. So again, the main reason that I got the scan and cut is so that I can just cut like a gazillion pieces, basically, with no problems at all. And the good thing is you get really good precision cuts with the scan and cut as well. So again, I'll have a link to the machine down below if you want to see this exact one that I have, which is the CM350 machine. And once it gets done, all you have to do is unload that mat, and as you can see, it cut everything out very, very nicely. And so I'm going to take my spatula and just pull up all those teeny tiny pieces that would have taken me either a million years to cut with scissors or a gazillion years to cut with my paper cutter, or I could just put it on here. So these are also available to Patreon members over at patreon.com/Liz for a day. And it's available to the Superfan Plus members as well. It's part of the ticket pack. So you can see I am taping everything down. And this is just printed on regular copier paper. So of course I want to make sure that I change the depth. Again, I can't say that enough. You just need to change your depth. And then the next thing that I'm doing is I'm framing things out. And I know you can't see this, and I was hoping that you could, but unfortunately my camera couldn't pick it up at this angle. And yes, there is a masked man running around back there. So even though I have this video sped up, I wanted to just let you know that it does take a few minutes for it to recognize your actual image. So you might want to be multitasking, because you're going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs just a little bit. It takes like maybe about 1 to 2 minutes to actually recognize what you have on the mat before you can continue on. But once it recognizes it and everything looks good, then you can just go for what you know. Now with this particular image, when I tried to recognize it, it came out with some jagged edges, and I'm going to show you a screen cut of one of the images where it has the jagged cut in a few moments, so hang with me. But what I did was I just asked the machine to kind of re-recognize it a little bit better. So that's going to be like for another video, but I did that and I was able to get like some good borders around these particular images. So you can see it cut very, very nicely. And then my next tip is to make sure that you get all that extra tape off of your mat, because it will start building up and it will affect how your cuts are going to be. But overall, I use tape on every single paper that I put on, and everything came out good. So these are the mini postcards, which is a digital kit as well over at pleasantcreations.com. And again, it's a gazillion images on here. And so I have cut these out by hand, but y'all, it took me a while. But with the machine, it only took a few minutes. So it definitely is a time saver. So again, I'm checking my depth because these are actually on cardstock. So I want to make sure the depth is at about 4 for cardstock on my machine. Again, you'll have to check your machine to see. Now you can see here where I'm framing things out and it's trying to recognize the borders. So when you first scan your paper, it's going to see your images. And then what you want it to do is to recognize your borders. So you can see just a little bit here where it did recognize all the little squares, but it had some problems. So I asked it to re-recognize it again. And it looked pretty good here. I actually zoomed in just to make sure, and I was hoping that you could see this, but it's kind of hard for you to see. Everything looked good, so I went ahead and said okay and cut and scan. And again, I'll do a separate tutorial on how to actually do all the settings, but this particular video is just for tips. So I'm letting the scan and cut do its thing. You have to be patient. Remember, that's one of our tips, is to be patient. So we're just going to continue on. So give this video a thumbs up if you love watching stuff like this. You all, I love watching and listening to my machines. It's kind of creepy almost, like I'm a brother scan and cut stalker. I like watching my machine cut. So now I'm going to unload the mat, and I already took the excess paper off of here, and I'm just using my handy dandy spatula. And one tip is to make sure that you keep all of your cutting devices in the little bag that it comes with, because they can get lost really, really easily. So I'm taping this on. Now I will say I already knew that I was going to have a problem cutting this particular paper because some of the images didn't really have a defined border. Now it kind of looks like it does, but if your image is too light and it doesn't have a defined border, your machine will have a problem with it. So I put this in, I checked my blade depth again, and then I went ahead and I scanned this particular image. And once I scanned it, of course, it kind of gave me like those jagged edges, so I still wasn't able to see, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. So I had to rescan it again. Now I actually rescan this paper 3 times to try to get it. Now my option was to just lift it off the mat and just cut it by hand, or use a Big Mama, which is my paper cutter, to actually cut these as well. So I decided that I would actually go in and see if there was another way for me to have those borders recognized. So here is your tip to recognize borders that your machine is having a hard time with. So here you see what it looks like. It's very jagged, and that's not what I wanted. So some of the pieces will come out okay and some of them wouldn't. So what I needed to do is to select OK. And then at the bottom, select that little box and it's going to give you some shapes. And I went to the square box and voila, it actually decided that this is where the square should go. So the machine kind of made the decision for me. And then you just select OK. And then you'll select cut. And then you are ready to go. So then your machine the button will turn green for start and stop, and you'll just hit that button and you can cut. So you can see that these cut. Now, when you do this, even though the machine thinks it recognizes the actual shape, it's maybe a little bit off, but in my opinion, it still saved me a ton of time because, again, your only options would have been to pull that up, cut it by hand, or use Big Mama to cut it. So now I'm all finished and I am going to just lay my display down, and I always keep the pouch right inside of the machine itself. And that's it. So I hope you got tons of tips for using your brother's scan and cut machine. If you don't have one and you're looking for one, I have a link below in the description to this exact machine, which is the CM350. So with that, I'm going to say love, peace, and hair grease from your sweet lotus blossom and lovable Lizzie. Have a fantabulous day and enjoy life.